things that are just perplexing. And I will get around to sawing somebody's leg off. Generally somebody with shorts. She's from Jersey. She's got short. Never mind. Okay. Forget what that was. It Nair?
Nair.
Oh, okay. Is that what it was? All right, so what I'm going to describe to you may be primitive, and it may seem primitive, but it probably is primitive compared to what we have in our medical standards today. I mean, that's the way it is, all right? But please keep in mind as I tell you, as this stuff unfolds, that 150 years from now, what are they going to think about us? You know, before we get all hoity-toity about it right here. Can you imagine what they're going to say in 150 years? That in the year 2017, we have not advanced past literally putting radiation into people. 150 years from now, you probably just take a pill, something like that. Say you too, sir.
Pictures in the post office.
There. I used to walk up there while church was going on, check out if I knew anybody. I never knew anybody. I always wanted that reward. All right, so I want you to think about what America would have been like in 1861. You know, the U.S. Army, and I'm talking about from Washington to California, probably would have been, and I'm talking clerks included, it might have been 15,000. That's not, I'm not saying it's an army, I'm saying that's the whole United States Army. Garrison troops doing Indian warfare and all this other stuff. The Utah expedition. You have to keep in mind that America's standing army, nobody was expecting the American Civil War to be on the scale that it is. So you get into medicine and you go to Minnesota, and if you think about how America was at the time, it's kind of like rural today, but it was definitely rural back then. Your next neighbor might be a mile away. You start going to Minnesota, you start inducting these boys into an army, and you start doubling, tripling, quadrupling the size of the United States Army. And before you know it, you've got more soldiers than you ever expected to have. The United States Army, their largest hospital before the war, I think was at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And this was huge. I think it held 400. Right? And so you get into medicine, they don't have enough doctors. And now you take these boys from Minnesota. You put them on a train, you ship them to Chicago. You put them in a camp of instruction. I was going to do Sinatra, but I backed up. A little early. You get to Chicago, or you take somebody from Maine. You can imagine how few people are up there. You ship them to Washington. You ship them to Philadelphia. Anyway, these men from Minnesota meet men from Illinois. These men from Illinois meet men from Indiana. And you might be, the average age of the Civil War soldier is not 16. It's not 18. That's a common misnomer. The average age of a Civil War soldier is 25.8 years old. So, they're hardy. They're in the prime of manhood. But because they're coming off these farms, and because the United States Army is not prepared for what is the influx of people that they're getting, with those two factors coming in, you have got a recipe basically for disaster. And just like, even though you're 25 years old, just like when you as parents put your kids into daycare for the first time, or you put them into school for the first time, they're going to have to run, these 25-year-olds are going to have to run the gambit of sickness and disease while their immune systems toughens up. and they just, some of them just can't hack it. I can't explain it to you, all right? But some people, this is one of the first uncomfortable things you'll hear. All people just aren't physically created equal. We just aren't. Hate to tell you youngsters that back there, but that's the way it goes. Except for you, young lady. You remind me of an emoji. So if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, these hardy young men, once they get into the camp, they start getting sick, and they start dying, and they're dying of stuff that we would pass off today, stuff that we probably wouldn't see. And the doctors are doing the best they can, but they don't understand exactly what's causing it. They knew by the time that the Civil War came along that if you took a group of people and one had measles and you put that man with a healthy group of soldiers, that measles would probably break out. But they didn't understand exactly how it spread. They knew if you took a group of soldiers and put them by a low-lying area with stagnant water, then you had a high probability of yellow fever or malaria breaking out. But they didn't know why. They felt it was the bad air rising from the ground. And they knew they did not understand infections. And regardless if they did, the one thing that we take for granted today, which they did not have, was the ability to fight infections. They had not, we as a human race had not invented the big P word. Penicillin. No way to fight it. Now you that are parents are very familiar with the routine. You take them to the doctor. You get the pink stuff. Basically it's a cousin of penicillin. The pink stuff doesn't work, you get the white stuff. And if the white stuff doesn't work, then you probably get more white stuff, or you get a shot. Or maybe they'll give you more pink stuff. I don't know. I made a doctor mad one time when I said, why do I have to come in here and pay this copay, $35? Why don't you just put a spigot out front and free refills, you know what I mean? I just come up and get some more. She didn't care for that. Oh, we gotta check this, this, and this. All right, okay, bad joke. Whatever. These men, not the majority of them are not dying, okay? But the majority of them can't hack it. A regiment from Minnesota, like the 1st Minnesota when they entered the war, which is sparsely populated, very sparsely populated back then, would have numbered 1,000 men. By the time that regiment got here to Gettysburg 2 years later, that regiment numbered 282. 282 men. Now I'm not saying all of them died, but I'm saying there's just some people that just couldn't hack it. Now it may not be from sickness. It may be that they can't do 10, 15 miles a day. You know what I mean? It may be, I don't know, maybe they got bad heart, maybe they got bad lungs. Something like that, who knows? But going back to the original point, all people are just not physically created equal. And that's the hard thing to say. I always like to use this analogy, but you'll never believe this, but this morning I was walking right there on that sidewalk, and I met a man had an Ole Miss hat on. And I said to him, "Hotty toddy." And he turned around, because Southerners generally speak to strangers. I know it's an anomaly for some northern people, but I once had one neighbor in my apartment complex, never met her. Strange people. Strange. Pennsylvanians are cold. We stopped, we were talking on that sidewalk right there, and he turned out to be from Vardaman, Mississippi, which is the sweet potato capital of the world. Population maybe 500, okay? My dad owns a laundromat there. My grandmother, which is the point of all this, used to buy her cigarettes at the one grocery store in town. And that fellow right there, his brother owned the filling station across the street. Now that is a small town. I mean, it doesn't even rate a red light. I'll put it to you this way, and I'm not kidding. Last time I was in Vardaman, last year I think, the mayor, I went by City Hall, and the mayor had ridden his four-wheeler to work. All right, my grandmother lived in Pilen. Pilen is about 50 people, and that is between Vardaman and Houston, Mississippi. She grew up there. Her father, what would that be, great-grandfather, started a turning mill there. Came out of Tennessee with a bunch of sawmillers, and they went into the turning mill. They made legs, wooden legs and stuff like that for your furniture. Bar stools toward the end. My grandmother, and I'm not kidding you, smoked 3 packs a day. 120s. If any of y'all smoke, you'd even appreciate it more. It's extra long. Sometimes she'd have 2 burning in an ashtray, but she'd forget about the first one. My grandmother lived to be 88, smoking 3 packs a day. Smoking never killed nobody. These doctors, they don't know what they're doing. My great-grandmother lived to be 98. She didn't smoke. She did snuff. Explain to her. All right. My grandmother probably would have made it a lot longer. But what am I telling you? My grandmother, genetically, physically, was just a tough old bird. All right. Now I had a coworker here, former supervisor, and I saw him. Worked with him for years. All right, he jogged for years. Years. Well, I love Culp's Hill. Used to live in the Culp house, actually. You go running to and from work. It's the craziest thing. Every day he ate for lunch, every day, yogurt and banana. Every day. He's in his 50s. One day he didn't come in. We sent one of the LE Rangers, law enforcement rangers, over his house. Didn't wake up. Genetically speaking, he was thin, he was smaller than me. Genetically speaking, he didn't have a good ticker. And you just can't overcome that. And it always puzzled me because his heart had to be in good condition. He'd exercised it so much. But that's the way it goes. And that's the same way it would happen with these Civil War soldiers. Some of them, they just couldn't measure up. So like, I don't know, y'all make corn whiskey up there? Nope. Well, you wouldn't tell me if you did. There's nothing like drinking unbonded whiskey. I mean, that's got to be a good American pastime. So, tastes better. Tell her what unbonded means. Means it doesn't have a sticker on it. If you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, like you make corn liquor, I don't know if you've ever seen the mash, but basically you're taking the contents of something, you're combining ingredients, you're letting it ferment, and then you're boiling it down to get the alcohol. Now, they didn't mean to do this in the American Civil War, but basically what they have by the time they get here to Gettysburg is the hardiest of the hardy. They have boiled down that solution by 70%, and now all they have is corn whiskey as you take a sip of clear liquid. That's all you'll remember from this program. So, I'm not saying these men were healthy, but I'm saying that they were hardy. At the last reveille of the Army of the Potomac, which is the Union Army, at Appomattox, one soldier recalled that when the bugles and the drums started playing, and these are men been in the Army, some of them for 4 years, was the soldiers rose from the ground, the coughs, the soldiers' hack, as they termed it, drowned out the instruments. All right, so let's get back to doctoring here. another statement that I've had a few people, medical people, get mad at me about, but it's true. All doctors are not created equal. I mean, they're like car mechanics, you know? Some of them are better at fixing Chevy. Some of them are better at fixing Fords. You know, when you get in the medical profession, that's why they call them specialists. I've always thought the hardest thing for a doctor to see is if it's not a common problem. If your symptoms mimic something else, how is he supposed to tell? He's only human. He's treating what he perceives that are going on right there. So you take the doctors from the American Civil War. Let's say that unit from Minnesota is going to come in. And when they come in to the Army, they need a doctor. Well, the Army doesn't have a doctor for them, so they bring one from home. That doctor, when he comes in, is probably, most of them are pretty competent. The doctor probably knows almost everybody in that unit. But back to that in a second. These men start coming in here, and you may be the most competent doctor, but what is that doctor supposed to do about your sickness? I mean, what does he have in order to treat it? That's how you get into herbs and so forth. Basically, there was two theories. There was two tracks that they could treat you with. One was going out of vogue, and one was coming into vogue during that time. The one that was going out of vogue was the theory that basically all sickness was based upon bad blood. And if you allowed the body, if you released the bad blood from the body would produce good blood. Count Dracula. You think I'm kidding? That's what Count Dracula. So, they actually had charts. We got seats over here. We actually have charts, ladies and gentlemen, for how much blood you should take out of somebody based on their illness. They would cup and bleed you. That's sort of going out, that's pretty much going out of vogue. The second theory that they treated people with is that illnesses were basically bowel-based. Bowel. So, what they could do, and they could do it very well, is they could stop you up, and they could blow you out. With regularity. The only program in the Park Service where we talk about poop. But a common ailment of the soldiers is they would come to the doctor and they would say they had the quick step. Right? That was the soldier's name for chronic diarrhea. All right? The quick step, you know? If you walk faster than that. I got food poisoning in a Kmart one time, and it was on the wrong side of the store. That's a long walk. You come to the doctor, and a common thing, even if you didn't have the quick step, is he would turn around and he would try to treat it, and they could do it. They had something called a medicine generically called blue mass. And basically it was an opiate based medicine, which if you know anything about Elvis, stops you up when you take a lot of opiates. Was his last concert in Minnesota? I have to look that up. It was up there somewhere. And look that up. When's Elvis's last concert?
I was about to.
You come to the doctor, he would turn around, he'd take a knife, he'd cut that blue mass off, and he'd give you a sliver of it. You'd eat it, it would go in your mouth, down your esophagus, through your stomach, into your intestines. And guess what? It would lodge in your intestines like a brick. Alright? And guess what? It worked. The only problem with that is what's happening a week later. Instead of like this, is that the Pee Wee Herman? Remember? Never know. He's like this. And he comes back to the doctor, and what's his complaint? Now he's constipated. And what's the doctor do? It turns around, he gives you a cathartic, purgative, some people would say. And you know what? It works. But you see how they could get into a cycle where it was hard to regulate such things. But that's what they would basically do. Now they could give you herbs, they could make, you know, back then, a lot of the pharmacies made their own pills. They would get the raw ingredients in and they would get the recipes basically, and they would have pill presses. And some of that would occur during the American Civil War. But the most expedient things are to do is the stuff that I just described to you.
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis? Yeah, Minneapolis, Indianapolis, see? Yeah.
Close.
That's close. Sad day. Day Elvis died. I've always heard a legend that Elvis's ancestor was in a North Carolina Confederate unit here. Can you imagine? I mean, you know, like Elvis in the Confederate uniform, you know, out there on the battlefield like dodging. Yeah? Where do you think he learned those moves from? Any questions? A lot of them are dying. I know, you know, I used to live in Vicksburg when I worked at that park. I lived in the National Cemetery, and I had 17,000 of y'all in my front yard. Okay? The vast majority of those, basically during the winter, they retrieved them literally because it was all flooded. The Union had cut the levees along the river and it flooded the interior of the state. They would bury the dead in the levees. It was the only dry ground they had. Then the soldiers would sleep on top of them. They literally went up and down the river and gathered up thousands, besides the battlefield. I mean, they're in there. But the vast majority of them are going to die of that sickness that they put them in. Like that. All right. Oh, let's shoot people. That's the wrong week to do that, huh? That's what you came out here for. Oh, wow. I haven't seen this one. What do you think? See, I have new toys too. Let me see what I got here. Talking about combat. Right here. Man, generically speaking, is always refining ways to kill each other. It just keeps getting better and better and better, more accurate, more lethal, and so forth. And it always will. Obviously, the ultimate weapon will be the nuclear bomb. The thing about the American Civil War, in a nutshell, is that the tactics that they were using out there had not caught up with the weaponry. In other words, the weaponry had far outpaced the tactics. The tactics they utilized here at Gettysburg were based upon guns that were accurate, rifles, or you want to call it muskets is the best word, that were accurate to maybe within 100 yards. The reality of it is, ladies and gentlemen, that the muskets were accurate here at Gettysburg to 400 yards, up to 1,000. The cannonballs in the American Revolution, they had, if you go to Yorktown or some American, Saratoga or some American Revolutionary battle, they got big cannons that shoot small balls. Huge cannon might shoot a 4-pound shot, 6-pound shot, 8-pound shot, something like that. 10-pound will be huge. Here at Gettysburg, they have the weight of that cannon, and now the most common cannon on this field shoots a 12-pound solid shot. And unlike the American Revolution, they now have explosive shells. Cannonballs that come out and they fuse burns down through the top of them, and then they explode into what is called shrapnel. And these big pieces of iron, you say that, iron? Iron. These big pieces of shrapnel will come down through here. And can you imagine? Look at that compared to her head. How'd you like to get hit by this thing? I'll pass it around. Everybody can feel it. Weapons are outpacing the tactics. But these generals from the American Civil War, were taught, most of them were taught at West Point in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. They're just doing what they were trained to do. They're using the manual. Same as you would if you got a new computer or something. That's all they know. Other type of round, which is least frequently used by these cannons here, but most frequently written about, is this little baby right here. This is called canister. It's got 28 1.5-inch iron balls and a tin can, but it can only be fired at 400 yards or less to be effective. You could shoot it longer, but it wouldn't be as effective. The reason you don't use them that much is because normally you don't want the enemy that close to your gun. But if you have to, this is a great defensive weapon. You press the muzzle, you fire the balls in front of that incoming enemy infantry, and they should be ricocheting about waist high. They're going to strike them in here. Pickett's charge, Union soldiers wrote about that the smoke obscured the Confederates down along the highway, and they'd shoot these canister balls down there, and up above the smoke they'd see this red mist appear. And then body parts go flying all over the place. Think of 28 of these with 1.5 pounds of powder. Coming at you. And now for the final thing, I should have said. Artillery probably caused around 15-20% of the wounds in the American Civil War. 2% of the wounds were caused by bayonets. Bayonets not used that frequently. Why? Because you don't ever get that close. The reason you don't get that close to each other is because this little baby right here, the Manet ball. There you go, man. The Manet ball. He actually pronounces it correctly. Americans call it minis. The mini ball. It was designed by Captain Manet of the French Army, and it is a conical bullet. Okay, big deal. This is the first time they shot a bullet-shaped bullet, conical shape, yeah, bullet-shaped projectile out of the gun. What does it do? All right, it's football season. Yeah, just like you throw a football, this bullet has rings on it. I'll pass it around, you'll see it better in just a minute. It has a hollow base underneath it. The powder explodes behind it. It goes up into this hollow base of the bullet, and this lead's got to go somewhere. It's a soft metal. Those rings, that metal is strained, is pushed out, and it conforms to the rifling on the inside the barrel, and it starts spinning as it's coming out. As it's coming out spiraling like a football, what it does is it gives a greater range, gives a greater accuracy, gives a greater velocity. So if it strikes a grown man, it would shatter their bone about 4 to 6 inches on average. If it hits you in the gut or it hits you in the head, that's nearly always fatal. But now the point is, unlike the Revolutionary War, now in Gettysburg they could shoot at you accurately at 4 times the distance they could from the American Revolution. So lining up shoulder to shoulder and marching across this field drives the casualty rate just sky high. It's all because of these little things right here. It's going to feel hard. You do not have to prove my statement here, okay? So don't put it in your mouth. Like sometimes I get these back with teeth marks in it. But lead is actually a soft metal. It feels hard. It is hard. It's hard to bend. But lead will actually, the deeper it drives into you, the flatter it will become. The more damage it will inflict. It might put a nickel-sized hole going in you. It might, if it comes out, it might be $50. See what I mean? And if it doesn't come out, then guess what the surgeon has to do? Right? The surgeon has to go in there and cut you open even more. He's probably going to cause more damage getting it out than it actually did going in. But that's what they wanted. Man's always refining. Yes, Pittsburgh.
True that the grooves in the naval contain like powder and stuff like that, and that would enhance gangrene?
Oh, I don't think, I've heard people, you hear all kinds of things. They pee on the bullets or the bayonet or something. I know it's a man thing. I pee on everything, but y'all got boys. Yeah, you know what I mean. I killed my mom's monkey grass. That's a hard thing to do. Monkey grass is pretty stout. If you think about it, no, I don't think they'd alter the bullets. And the reason I say that is because the bullets, I'm passing around an individual bullet, but the way they actually came out into the field is they were wrapped in paper because the bullet and the powder were self-contained. So you tear it off, you pour the powder off one end of the tube into the gun, and then you tear the rest of the paper off, or don't tear it off, but you put that bullet up top. A lot of times they'd be greased, like, pig fat or something like that, and they grease those bullets down. Now that might cause some infection, but it wasn't intentional because it was meant to, it was supposed to make it easier to drive, not to infect. Did I answer?
Yeah, I just thought it was that the grooves, the actual grooves in the naval, because of the crevices there,
yeah,
that they would capture powder and other things that would...
I think it could, what you're saying could be true. I mean, it could drive up the rate of infection because there would be more trash in those grooves. I just don't think it was intentionally done to harm. It was done, the grooves are done to grip that spiraling on it. Make it turn. I've seen mini balls without grooves in them, like the British Enfield. They're smooth on the side. I've also heard that, correct me, you probably know, the old legend that Union bullets are 3 rings and Confederate bullets are 2 rings or something like that. Any others?
So you've been talking all the soldiers are armed with muskets, right? So how common were the repeater rifles?
Not
very.
Not very common. Now, was there repeater rifles? Did they have? Who asked me that? Oh, well, you got deep boy. I'm looking for an old man. I'm looking up here. Whoa, look out! You're gonna get on the radio. Yeah. And right now, we'd like to play you that number one love tune. It's always the small guys with the deep voices. Ladies. What are you asking?
So how common were the repeater rifles?
Let me answer it a different way. There's a lag time. Okay, they've got better weapons by the end of the Civil War than literally, ladies and gentlemen, what they called loading in the 9 times. You know how long that took? And the manual says a soldier should be able to load the weapon 3 times a minute. I can't do it. Maybe they could. I can't even do it shooting blanks. I think they were shooting probably if they were in a hurry. Maybe 2 times a minute. But anyway, that's not the point. That's obviously a slow rate of fire. Yes, they have better weapons, but the lag time in 1861 or 1862, the U.S. government might order 100,000 muzzle-loaded U.S. Army Springfield weapons. Well, those weapons might not be delivered till 1864. That's a lot of guns to make. If you think about having to turn everything and, stuff like that. So by 1864, they had repeating rifles. But they were just now, 1864, any army worth its sand, I mean a conventional army of a conventional nation, will ideally want all their ammunition uniform. Hence the name NATO ammo, right? if you're going to be fighting alongside the British or the Germans or something like that, it would behoove you to everybody to have the same type bullet. That's what they're trying to do in the American Civil War. And so by the time, even though the technology was there, the orders were just now coming in, and the government was obligated to pay for it because they had ordered them. In the Civil War, in the post-Civil War, they had so many of these guns laying around. You do last night. They had so many of these guns laying around that they actually converted them to breech loaders. Did they have a name for that? Breech loader. So these are the type weapons that actually Custer's men would be carrying at Little Bighorn. Well, guess what? I've been told that once that musket got hot, you know, you're supposed to be able to increase the rate of fire. You shove the bullet in there, close the breech on it, and fire it. You open the breech and the shell ejects. Well, the ejection system was faulty. So here come all these Indians over the hill, and these United States cavalrymen are getting a knife out and trying to pry the shell casing out of there. As they come, thank you, man. As they're coming out of there. Which, you add to that, you know, being nervous, what was a recipe for disaster. I don't know if they were going to make it anyway, but you get my point. Their weapons weren't very well made. They should have kept the old. Did that answer the question? Yeah, that makes sense. You go Iron Man? Do Iron Man? Don't lie, man. Any others? Let me say one more thing about the doctors. Okay, because this is a big point right here. Go back to those troops that came from Minnesota. I'm about to show you how to amputate. You may have a competent doctor that comes, what town? Name me a town in Minnesota. Cambridge. Cambridge, Minnesota. Not as good as Gardner. You go with it. Cambridge, Minnesota. Doctor may be competent in that town. He may be on the cutting edge of technology. He may be a good doctor. You put him in the Army. He gets out here. This is his first time on a battlefield. Let's say it's 1862. How many gunshot wounds do you think this man's ever treated in his career in Minnesota? How many compound fractures? How many amputations? How many resections do you think an average doctor will be doing? Some of them have done none. And the hard thing to tell you is, but the reality of it is, just like today, you can put people through school, you can give them all the book education you want. It ain't nothing like hitting that table. Hands-on experience. And there is a learning curve, ladies and gentlemen, for these doctors to find out what works for them and what doesn't work. And I'm not saying they're not killing them intentionally, ladies and gentlemen. They're just learning. All right? But that is an unintended consequence of what is happening. Seems to be the word for the day, unintended consequence. All right, any other questions? What's in the box? Yeah. Remember the boom boxes? Carry them around right here. All right, what children? She was falling asleep. She'd be my first victim if I was to choose one. What she gets for not paying attention. Where are you going? You got shorts on? Winter, winter, chicken dinner. Right there. Uh-huh. You coming? You better come. I'll have to take your sister. Oh, that'll get you up. You come up and help me. All right, so what I want you to do, if you go around front, don't jump up here because she's old and rickety right here, but if you could slide up on the table, and let's put your head this way and your feet this way, and I'll show the young lady what's in the box. All right. What we want to do at this moment is relax. It won't cut you. Oh my God. All right, let's swap places then. You get up here. You stand over there. Congratulations. That's what you get for being brave. I should have never let you out. All right, so they come in here, and, you know, it's a hard thing to say to y'all, but, well, let's just take this past week. I forget what day of the week that was, but obviously you had to live in a box if you didn't know about Las Vegas, all right? The thing that happened in Las Vegas, not the act itself, but the subsequent medical care and how they treated those gunshot wound victims actually came out of the American Civil War. It's not a very pleasant word, if you're unfamiliar with it. It's not a very pleasant thing to think about. But the word is triage. And basically what that means is that your medical system is overwhelmed. That you have, Las Vegas was not set up that night to receive that many people. I haven't heard a hard count on how many were wounded. I've heard injured, but not wounded. But can you imagine, the ER that night was not ready for 100 people, 200 people to come in. Yes, ma'am. When I say wounded, I mean gunshot wounds. When I say injured, I mean somebody that got their arm broken and getting trampled on the way out the door. That's what I would say the difference is. Right? Does anybody disagree with it? So, a slight difference. I'm splitting hairs on you. You're right. What is triage? If I'm a surgeon and I got 500 people laying out here waiting to get treated, I can't save everybody. That's the hard thing to say about it. So I have three categories. That's the categorization of the wounded. First category would be like gunshot wound through the hand. Does it hurt? Yeah, it hurts. Is she hurt? She's hurt. Is she going to die anytime soon? No. No arteries running through your hand. She can wait. Gunshot wound. This is a bullet probe. All right? You probe for the bullet right there. Gunshot wound to the gut. Gunshot wound to the head. What is probably going to happen? They're going to die. Now, let's take gunshot wound to the ankle or the extremity of the arm right here. She's hurting. She's probably got, maybe has arterial blood shooting everywhere. Dark blood, maybe light blood, who knows? But if you got blood shooting out like a garden hose or a sprinkler, then you probably got a problem. And that patient could probably be saved as long as they are helped. I wouldn't say immediately, but immediately. This is who we're going to prioritize. Those that are in the most need of help and we think we can save. So, first thing they would do, and this didn't happen on the operating table, is they would bring these wounded back into the field aid station. They bring them off the battle line, and that's where the first triage is done. The last category I named to you, those that needed to be helped immediately, those are the ones that get on the ambulance to go back to the hospital. Those are the ones arriving for me to operate upon. Is this making sense to everybody? All right, so when that happens, ladies and gentlemen, by the time this patient gets here, and the reason I wanted somebody in shorts is I always like to do the leg amputation. I don't like dealing with breeches. Lost a lot of good breeches. We can do it all here. You get them back here to the hospital, they should already have, to the main hospital, they should already have, at least one of your relatives is happy, they should already have a tourniquet on. Because what's the fastest thing that's going to kill this soldier? Loss of blood. All right. Can I get you to bend your knee? Another one. It's closer to the crowd. wrap this around her leg, the upper portion of her leg, and put it through there like you would a belt. Either way, it don't matter. Either way, we're going to choke her off. Loop it through there, just like a belt. You won't come up and take pictures. What is for? Don't cinch it down. No, it'll work. All right, there you go. Just leave it like that. You'll get the general point. Now, this tourniquet would have been up higher on her leg. There are 3 arteries that come down through the leg, and if her wound is down here in the lower extremity and she's shooting blood out, it may be from multiple arteries. But if it's from one artery, I want to take this wooden block and I want to find that artery that's specifically cut, and that's the one I want to put pressure on. And, you know, today's tourniquets actually have gauges to show you the amount of pressure. Uh-oh, we got a nurse here. So if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, you would wrap this as tight as possible. You would know if it's working or not, because what would stop? The blood. Okay? It's not rocket science. So she would come out here, she would already have this tourniquet on. Now, what she didn't have, and what is a common misnomer about Civil War surgeries, is that at this point, I would take a stick or a bullet and insert it into her mouth. Hence the word biting the bullet. Did it happen? It happened. Is it true they put belts in people's mouths? Yes. Was it common? No. Most surgeries were done under the effects of anesthesia. They were not awake for this, and they had 3 ways to put you into that twilight sleep, as they say in the medical field. They could use nitrous, which was bulky and it only lasted as long as it lasted, right? They could use ether, which is any of y'all got a diesel? You ever go out there and start your diesel with ether? You got to try it sometime, man. Oh, yeah. You got a diesel? You go out there and get you a lighter. Yeah, that's what you do. Spray it with a little ether. Don't do that. Ether is highly flammable. And these surgeons will be operating 24 hours a day. And then there is chloroform. And so what you would do, whichever application you wanted to use, this is for this instance, a chloroform applicator. It's a funnel, and it's got a sponge in it. All right, and so what I'm going to do is, if I got time, is I'm going to take pig lard, and I'm going to wipe it on her face. Because this chloroform is super cold. It'll actually, not from the heat, but from the coldness, it will scald the skin. So what I'll do is wipe her face down with that lard, and then I will put this applicator over, and I will pour a few drops of chloroform into the sponge. Now this is the tricky part, one of the tricky parts of this. There are no anesthesiologists here. There's nobody standing here at the head of the table monitoring your blood signs, or vital signs is a better word for it. You know? So what they do is, ladies and gentlemen, is it's all by sound. They hold the applicator here until they hear your breathing go to whatever level they think is sufficient. Now think about this. Think this through with me. If they don't give you enough, what's going to happen? If they give you too much, what's going to happen? That's right. Kill you. And they didn't record this, y'all. I don't know how many died while the learning curve, while they were figuring out, these nurses were figuring out how it worked, what was good. Yeah. It happens. I mean, it's well-intentioned, though. It's unintended consequences. All right, so we got the patient out. And now we are ready to, at this point, you know, we've already probed. If she had bullet wounds or something like that, this is called a bullet probe or whatever. But obviously I would go for the largest wound that I had to deal with first. Once she was out is when I would go in here and start looking and examining the wound. That's when I can see what the shape the bones are in and all this other stuff. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to decide to amputate. Now, Where'd you come from? I didn't see you back here. What are you looking all giddy about? Who is it? Your brother? I'll be with you in just a second. I could amputate. If her ankle's shattered, I could amputate her right here. All right? But look how much shin bone I'm leaving on it. Now you may say, hey, that's a great idea. I got a joint right there. Got the knee joint. I can do that. They learned the hard way, not in the American Civil War, but from prior wars, that you can't amputate this low. Why? Because the body will not support, the bone will not support the weight of the body on that length right there. So what I'm going to do, if you find your own kneecap there, brother, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 fingers and I'm going to amputate her, cut 3 fingers length beneath the knee. Where I'm going to cut her. Right in there. Why? Because I can save the joint and she has enough bone to support the weight. They learned the hard way. That's the way it's got to be done. It might still be done. Well, I don't know with prosthetics today. Maybe they won't have to do that. All right, so this is where I'm going to cut her. You in the medical field too? Get more interested by the minute. Doctor is in. What are these called? Small knives, scalpels. Exactly right. Now, how many of you have ever done any sewing? You do sewing? You do cross stitch? What'd you do? Christmas? Okay. Any themes? You should write a sonnet. We're going to take these scalpels right here, and just like you sew clothes, I'm going to cut a pattern in her. I could do it a number of different ways, but just like you make a shirt, I better have more material than I need at the end because I can always cut it off. So I could cut her circular. I could do a V-shaped flap if you wanted to on either side. There's a number of different ways I could do it. And really it's just all practice, if you will. So whatever pattern I wanted to do, I would cut her. Let's just make it simple. I'll cut her circular. And I've been told by people in the medical field that skin is a wonderful material to work with. All right? It's it'll stretch, it's tough, etc. You take that, once I've cut her, I'll take the skin and I'll roll it back over the top of her kneecap.
She needs a little more chloroform.
See, all is right. So what am I left with once I roll that skin back? What is here? Muscle and bone. Okay? Once I do that, ladies and gentlemen, I cut that back. We're going to go to these little things right here. These are called tenaculums. And basically what they are is they're hooks, fishing hooks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for those 2 arteries coming below the knee right there, and I'm going to hook them first, and then I'll take a scalpel and cut them. I hook them first because if I cut the artery without hooking them, the artery will shrink back into there. So you got to have a hold of it before you do this. And this to me is the most important part of the operation. This is just my opinion, all right? So tell you what it's worth. I only play a doctor under this tent. No, not funny. Okay. So, you bring these, you hold the arteries down. You probably have an assistant. I suppose you'd have to. You'd have an assistant hold the artery in place. And this is where I make my money as a surgeon. I have to tie a knot basically on a big earthworm. And that's not that easy, if you think about it. And I have to make it taut enough so it won't bleed out anymore. So I cut them, hold them, tie it off, pull them aside. Once I get those arteries secured, that's when we're ready. Pictures. Oh, is that him right over there? Capturing the whole moment for your rehearsal dinner. All right? You come over here. I need you for a second. Stand on this end over here. Hold the foot up. You've got to hold it stouter than that now, all right? So what I'm going to do now, is what? I'll cut her all the way through the bone. Doesn't really matter, does it? I've got the artery secured, or should, I hope I do. I cut her all the way to the bone. After I do that, we'll just bend it back up. After I do that, ladies and gentlemen, on 3, we're going to say, ooh, ah. 1, 2, 3. Yep, could have been you. Right there. All right, now I'm not going to make her just for something I'm not going to do anyway. Take it that they would have had the patient's leg way off the table. Why? Because I couldn't get any leverage on this thing with it in the general position. So I would have her legs off here, and I would probably have her, the assistant, standing right here, holding the leg. And what I'm trying to do is I need pressure, just like you cut a tree limb. All right? You just got to get the right angle on it right there. And so with that, you come in here, ladies and gentlemen, and what? Bone chips. Blow them off. All right. Now, what is the relation here? Friend. Okay. BFFs. At this point, we won't worry about it. All right. All right. What I need you to do: take her leg, pretend to take her leg here. We'll throw it out the window. And they would do it. They would have piles of bones and legs, arms, and so forth outside. Yes, sir.
Did they sterilize their instruments?
Heck no. Had no idea about it. It won't hurt you. It won't hurt you. It won't hurt you. And I'll tell you, and this is not what you asked, but this is the main difference. You can correct me. I haven't figured you two out yet. You can correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding of a modern amputation, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest difference between the American Civil War and like a modern amputation is the fact that in a modern amputation, if they knew you were coming, they would take this stump, okay, and they would perform the amputation in like a rubber tub. And what they would do then is, at this point, they would take gallons, in today's medicine, they would take gallons of sterilized water, and they would flush that stump out to get all the sawdust out of there, and the bone chips, because it'd be flying all over. This is like sawing a tree limb, okay? You get chips everywhere. Well, I got y'all's attention now. This is nice. So you cut this off here, ladies and gentlemen. You throw the leg away, and in the Civil War they didn't flush it out. At this point, what they would do, and they probably do this to a certain extent today, is that if I can get it out, they would take these tweezers, and they would pick the bone chips out. But the fine stuff, the fine sawdust, what you got there, they can't pick that up with a pair of tweezers. So that's going to be a problem in the years to come. But you know what? I ain't got time to worry about it. So what would I do to sterilize my instrument? Like that. And we ready to go. All right, so cut the leg off. Get the bone chips out of the way, etc. Now we could close it up right here. Once again, they learn the hard way. Over time, if I was to close this, pull the skin down, make the flap, close the wound off, over time, think about what the edge of this bone is shaped like. what is it going to do to that skin and muscle over time? Right, it's going to punch through there. If you ever cooked a ham, you know, a ham bone come out. All right, so people eat. Yeah. So you think about it, ladies and gentlemen. What I'm going to do is now, somebody didn't steal it on me. No, I got another one right here. This, ladies and gentlemen, is called a bone file. Remember, this was the bullet probe. Now it's a bone file. On the edge of it, I know I'm dating myself, but do you remember when some politicians, local politicians would run for election, they'd give out emery boards. Explain to them what an emery board is. So if you think about it, you file your fingernails down before you bought them. Just would have bought fingernails, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to file the edge of that bone down. And what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to make it smooth, like the end of a broom handle, rounded, so it won't punch through. And after I do that, I've got another method here. I've got these bone clippers. I clip pieces of the bone off. Anyway, you get the point. Basically like your fingernails. I'm ready to close it. So what I'll do is I'll take the tendons and the muscles that are laying here, I'll bring them down and I'll make a pad underneath that bone. Then I'll take the skin, I'll roll it back down over the top, and hopefully if I cut the pattern in the right length, it should come together. Just like a good pattern will. All right, that's why you want more skin than you actually need, because you can always pull it, suture it, and then cut off the length that you don't know, or it'll rot off, whatever. So you take this down. Now I've had people ask me, well, okay, Matt, why come you don't cauterize this darn thing? Meaning put slap hot iron on it, like Josie Wales. You saw Josie Wales? That's a good movie. Best Civil War movie ever. You okay? All right. So you don't do that, ladies and gentlemen, for the following reasons. You take this, you roll it back down. You have, now this is what's probably different from a modern amputation too. I'm going to take the tips of the arteries. Remember how I sutured them up? I'm going to take those tips of the arteries, and as I suture it, I'm going to leave the ends of the arteries hanging out of the stump. The reason for that, ladies and gentlemen, is like when you had a baby. And what'd they do before they sent it home from the hospital? They tied off that umbilical cord. And what happened to the umbilical cord several days later? It just falls off. It's the same principle basically right here. But it allows the doctor after a few days to come back in here and tug on that thing. And if the body is healing itself correctly, then it should break loose, because the body sealed its own self off. If it's not, it's probably as readily apparent, then you got a problem. But the reason you don't cauterize them, ladies and gentlemen, is because if the stitches on or the knot on the artery doesn't hold, then I'm going to have to go back in there and fix it. And if I cauterize them, I got to cut him again. If I stitch him, all I got to do is cut those stitches and it'll fall apart. See what I mean? That's the